Keep the change. You people need it more than I do." The words didn't just land. They lingered, hanging in the air like the low hum of a neon sign flickering above the counter, casting a tired glow across chipped tiles and chrome stools that had seen better decades. The diner smelled like burnt coffee and buttered toast, the kind of place where the clock on the wall ticked louder than the conversations, where regulars came not for the food, but for the feeling of being known. Outside, rain tapped steadily against the windows, streaking the glass in uneven lines, turning the streetlights into blurred halos. Inside, nobody looked up at first. Not when the man in the worn jacket slid a few crumpled bills across the table. Not when his voice carried just enough edge to cut through the quiet. But she did. Ava Johnson paused mid-step, a ceramic mug balanced carefully in her hand, her fingers steady even after a double shift that had started before sunrise. She wasn't supposed to react. That was the unspoken rule. Keep moving. Keep smiling. Keep the peace. But something in his tone, sharp, dismissive, practiced, made her glance over. He didn't look like much. Mid-40s, maybe. Unshaven, tired eyes, the kind of face you'd pass on the street without a second thought. His jacket was damp from the rain, his boots scuffed, his posture relaxed in a way that felt almost deliberate, like he was watching more than he was letting on. Ava set the mug down at another table, her name tag catching the light for a second before she turned back toward him. Around her, the diner moved on. A couple in the corner argued quietly over a check. A trucker laughed too loud at something on his phone. Plates clinked. Coffee poured. Life, in all its small, ordinary rhythms. But at table 7, something shifted. The man leaned back slightly, eyes scanning the room, not hurried, not distracted, measuring, as if every movement, every reaction, was being noted somewhere unseen. Ava approached with her usual calm, her apron neatly tied, her expression soft but alert. "Can I get you anything else, sir?" she asked, her voice even, respectful, untouched by the weight of his earlier words. He looked at her. Then, really looked. Not at her uniform. Not past her. At her. And for a fraction of a second, something flickered behind his eyes. Not kindness. Not yet. Curiosity. Like he'd just found the one variable in a room full of constants. The rain outside picked up, drumming harder now, a steady rhythm against the glass. Somewhere in the kitchen, a bell rang. Order up. But neither of them moved. Because in that quiet space between question and answer, between assumption and reality, something unseen had already begun. And no one in that diner, not the cook, not the customers, not even Ava herself, realized that this ordinary night, in a place most people forgot, was about to become a test no one saw coming. The man did not answer right away, and that silence stretched just long enough to feel intentional, like a pause placed carefully in the middle of a sentence that had not been spoken yet, his fingers tapping once against the edge of the table before he reached for his coffee, lifting it slowly, not to drink, but to watch the way the steam curled upward into the dim light. And then he set it back down without taking a sip, his eyes still on Ava, still studying, still measuring something she could not see, something she did not know she was being graded on. And across the room, another waitress named Kelly leaned over the counter, whispering under her breath to a coworker, her glance sharp, amused, the kind of look that said she had already made up her mind about table 7 and the man sitting there. Just another difficult customer. Just another small story that would not matter by the end of the night. But the man shifted slightly in his seat and let his hand slide off the table. And that was when it happened. His wallet slipped free from the edge, dropping quietly to the floor near his boot. Not loud enough to draw attention. Not obvious enough to feel like an accident. And Ava saw it. Just a flicker of motion in her peripheral vision. And for a moment, she did nothing. Because in a place like this, moments like that came with choices, and choices came with consequences. And behind her, Kelly noticed too. Her eyes narrowing slightly as she wiped down a nearby table. Her pace slowing. Watching to see what Ava would do. Watching like it was entertainment. Like it was a test of something unspoken between them. And the man still said nothing. Still did not reach down. Still did not acknowledge the wallet resting on the tile. And the rain outside pressed harder against the glass. A steady rhythm now. Like time marking itself in seconds no one could get back. And Ava stepped forward, one careful step, then another, her shoes quiet against the floor as she bent. down and picked it up, the leather worn but not cheap, heavier than it should have been, and she held it in her hand for a second longer than necessary, just long enough to feel the weight of it. Not just money, but choice. And she could feel the eyes on her now. Not everyone, but enough. The subtle shift of attention that happens when something small might become something else, and she straightened, placing the wallet gently on the table in front of him, her voice calm, steady, unchanged, saying, "You dropped this, sir. Nothing more, nothing less, no expectation, no performance, just the simple return of something that was not hers." And for the first time, the man smiled. But it was not warm, not yet. It was a quiet acknowledgement, like a note taken, like a box checked in a list only he could see. And he nodded once, slow, deliberate, before opening the wallet just enough to glance inside, confirming something, and then closing it again, his fingers lingering on the edge as if the object itself held more meaning than it should. And across the room, Kelly exhaled sharply, rolling her eyes as she turned away, muttering something about wasted opportunities, something about how people like that never notice anyway. But the man noticed everything, and as Ava stepped back, returning to her rhythm, to her work, to the quiet dignity that had carried her through every shift before this one, he leaned back again, his gaze following her now, not casually, not dismissively, but with a focus that had sharpened, because the first test had not been about the wallet, not really, and somewhere between the rain, the silence, and the choices no one else thought mattered, the night had already begun to reveal who people were when they believed no one important was watching. The bell above the kitchen window rang again, sharp and metallic, cutting through the low murmur of the diner as plates slid onto the counter. But Ava did not rush this time, not because she was slow, but because something inside her had shifted, something subtle, like a quiet awareness settling into place. And across the room, the man at table 7 adjusted his sleeve, revealing just the edge of a watch that did not belong in a place like this. Clean lines, understated, the kind of detail most people would miss unless they knew what they were looking at. And he noticed that she noticed, not directly, not with a reaction, but with the smallest pause in her movement before she turned away again, choosing not to linger, choosing not to ask. And that choice mattered more than anything she could have said, because curiosity can reveal intention, but restraint reveals character. And he leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows on the table now, his posture less relaxed, more engaged, as if the experiment had entered a second phase that no one else could see. And without calling her over, he reached for his cup again, and this time took a sip, grimacing just enough to suggest dissatisfaction, not exaggerated, not theatrical, just real enough to provoke a response if someone was paying attention. And Kelly was paying attention. She always was when it came to customers who might complain, because complaints meant tips lost or gained, meant attention from the manager, meant opportunity. And she moved quickly, stepping in before Ava could return, her voice suddenly bright, overly polished, asking if everything was all right, offering a fresh cup before he could even answer, her hands moving faster than her thoughts, eager, practiced. And the man watched her too, the same way he had watched Ava, the same quiet calculation. But there was a difference now, a contrast forming, and he let Kelly replace the coffee, let her lean in just a little too much, let her laugh at nothing, let her perform. And when she turned away, satisfied, he waited, counting something invisible in his head. And then, almost casually, he nudged the new cup just enough for it to tilt, not spill, not dramatically, just enough to create a small ring of coffee on the table, a stain that spread slowly across the surface like a test unfolding in real time. And this time, he did not look at Kelly, he did not call out, he did not react at all. He simply sat back and watched, and Ava saw it again, the small disruption, the quiet imbalance. And she approached without hesitation, a clean cloth already in her hand, her movements efficient, unhurried, as if she had seen this 1,000 times before and none of them had changed who she was. And as she wiped the table, she spoke softly, not apologizing for something that was not her fault, not assigning blame, just acknowledging the moment, saying, "Let me take care of that for you." Her tone steady, grounded, the kind of voice that did not seek approval. And the man studied her again, more closely now, because this was not about mistakes or accidents anymore. It was about response, about presence, about the way a person chose to show up when no one was keeping score, except he was. And as Ava finished, setting the cup back in place with quiet precision, he asked his first real question, his voice lower now, stripped of its earlier edge. Do you always do that? And she paused just long enough to meet his eyes, not defensively, not cautiously, just honestly, before answering, I just do my job, sir. And in that simple sentence, there was no performance, no calculation, no attempt to impress, only truth. And for the first time that night, something shifted in him, not visible to anyone else, not even to Ava, but real enough to change the direction of everything that would come next, because the second test had never been about the coffee, just like the first had never been about the wallet, and somewhere between intention and action, between observation and judgment, the difference between people was becoming impossible to ignore. The rain softened for a moment, shifting from a steady drum to a quiet whisper against the windows, and in that brief lull, the diner felt almost still, like the entire room had taken a breath it did not realize it was holding. But the man at table 7 did not relax, not even slightly, because stillness, to him, was not peace, it was clarity, and clarity was where truth had nowhere left to hide. And he reached into his pocket again, slower this time, more deliberate, pulling out a folded receipt and placing it flat on the table, smoothing it with his fingers as if it mattered, as if it was worth attention. And then he glanced toward the register where the manager stood, distracted, counting bills, unaware of the quiet shift happening just a few feet away. And without raising his voice, the man spoke again, not to Ava this time, but just loud enough for the space around him to catch the words. I think I was overcharged, simple, controlled, but enough to trigger something immediate in the room, because complaints always did. And Kelly turned first, faster than before, her expression tightening as she stepped forward, already preparing her response, already choosing her side, asking what the issue was with a tone that leaned more toward defense than understanding. And the man slid the receipt toward her without looking up, his posture unchanged, his voice calm. I ordered coffee and eggs, nothing else. But this says something different. And Kelly picked it up, scanning it quickly, her brows furrowing, not because she found an error, but because she had already decided there was not one. And she explained, a little too quickly, that the system must be correct, that mistakes did not usually happen, that maybe he had forgotten what he ordered, her words stacking on top of each other, building a wall instead of opening a door. And Ava watched from a few steps away, not interrupting, not inserting herself, just observing, the same way she had been observed all night without knowing it. And the man let the explanation finish, let the air settle again before he spoke, softer now, almost reflective. I know what I ordered. And there was no anger in it, no accusation, just a quiet certainty that made the moment heavier than it should have been. And that was when Ava stepped forward, not quickly, not urgently, just present, her voice steady as she asked if she could take a look. And Kelly hesitated, just for a second, long enough to show the crack in her confidence, before handing over the receipt with a dismissive shrug, as if it did not matter anyway. And Ava studied it carefully, not rushing, not assuming, her eyes moving from the printed lines to the table, to the empty plate, to the cup, connecting details that most people would ignore. And then she spoke, not to prove someone wrong, not to win, just to clarify. There is an extra item here, she said, her tone neutral, grounded. It should not be on this bill. And the manager looked up then, drawn by the shift in energy, stepping closer, asking what was going on. And Ava explained simply, pointing to the line, offering a solution instead of a problem. We can fix it at the register, no issue. And the manager nodded, relieved, grateful for the ease of resolution, already turning to adjust the total. And Kelly stepped back, her expression tightening again, not because of the mistake, but because of what it revealed. And through it all, the man at table 7 said nothing, not yet, his eyes moving between them, not judging the error, but the responses, the choices, the instincts that surfaced when something small became something telling. And as Ava handed the corrected receipt back to him, her movements calm, her voice unchanged, he looked at her a little longer this time, not with curiosity, but with recognition. Because the third test had never been about the bill, just like the others had not been about money or coffee or anything that could be counted. And in a place where everything seemed ordinary, she had done something rare, She had chosen truth without needing credit, and that was something you could not teach, only reveal. The manager adjusted the register total with a quick tap of the screen, the soft beep sounding louder than it should have in the quiet that followed. And for a moment, everything seemed resolved, simple, contained, the kind of small correction that usually disappeared as quickly as it appeared. But the man at table 7 did not reach for the updated receipt right away. Instead, he let it sit there between them, untouched, as if the paper itself was no longer important, and his attention shifted again, not to the numbers, not to the mistake, but to the people, to the patterns that had already begun to form in the span of a single hour. And Ava stepped back into her rhythm once more, moving toward another table, refilling a glass, offering a quiet smile to a tired customer, her presence steady, consistent, unchanging. And that consistency was what held his focus now, because consistency could not be faked, not for long, not without cracks, and he had spent years learning how to find those cracks in boardrooms, in negotiations, in people who believed they were performing well enough to pass unnoticed. And he leaned forward slightly, finally picking up the receipt, folding it once, twice, before placing it neatly beside his plate, his movements precise, controlled, and then, without warning, he stood up, not abruptly, not dramatically, just enough to shift the balance of the room again, his chair scraping softly against the tile, drawing a few glances from nearby tables, and he reached into his jacket pocket, pulling out a small stack of cash, not flashing it, not counting it openly, just enough for those closest to see that it was more than expected, more than necessary. And he placed it on the table beside the folded receipt, his voice carrying just enough to reach Ava without calling her name, saying, "I will be back in a minute." Simple, neutral, but intentional. And then he walked toward the door, his steps unhurried as he pushed it open, the sound of rain rushing in for a brief second before the door closed behind him, leaving the diner in a strange kind of silence, the kind that follows something unfinished. And Kelly noticed first, her eyes locking onto the cash left behind, her expression shifting quickly from annoyance to calculation, and she moved closer to the table, not touching the money yet, but standing near it, as if proximity alone gave her some claim, some right to decide what happened next. And the manager glanced over too, his brow tightening slightly, aware that something about the situation did not sit quite right, but unsure of what to do without a clear problem to solve. And Ava saw it all from across the room, the unattended table, the money, the absence of the man who had been there just seconds ago. And she paused again, just for a moment, the same kind of moment that had defined everything so far, because in spaces like this, it was never the big decisions that revealed who people were, it was the small ones, the ones that came without warning, without audience, without immediate consequence. And she walked toward table 7, her steps measured, her expression unchanged, and she looked down at the cash, not reaching for it, not reacting, just acknowledging its presence, its weight, its implication. And behind her, Kelly spoke, her voice low but sharp, saying, "If you left it, it is probably a tip. You should just take it before someone else does." But Ava did not move, did not respond right away, because she understood something that the others did not, something that could not be seen on the surface, that not everything left behind was meant to be taken, and not every opportunity was what it appeared to be. And outside, just beyond the rain-streaked glass, the man stood under the dim light of the awning, watching through the window, his gaze fixed on that table, on that moment, on the choice that was about to be made, because the next test had already begun, and this time, it would not be about what was returned or corrected, but about what was left untouched. The cash sat there, still and obvious, a quiet weight in the middle of table 7, and no one touched it, not at first, because moments like that had a way of stretching, of holding people in place just long enough for instinct to surface. And Kelly crossed her arms, shifting her weight as she glanced toward the door, then back at Ava, her voice lower now, edged with impatience, saying, "He is gone. You saw him walk out. Nobody leaves that kind of money by accident." And the manager lingered near the register, watching without stepping in, because there was no rule for this, no clear line to follow, just a situation waiting for someone to define it. And Ava stood there, her eyes on the table, not on the money itself, but on what it represented, a question without words, a choice without instruction. and she reached forward, but not to take it, not to claim it. Instead, she adjusted the plate slightly, straightened the folded receipt, small movements that restored order without changing ownership, and then she gathered the cash gently, not counting it, not inspecting it, just holding it with the same care she would give anything that was not hers, and she turned toward the counter, her step steady, her expression unchanged. And Kelly exhaled sharply, following a step behind, saying, "You are seriously going to hand that in? You think anyone is going to come back for it?" And Ava did not argue, did not defend her choice. She simply placed the money beside the register and said he stepped out. He might return. We should hold it for him. Her voice calm, final, and the manager nodded slowly, a hint of relief crossing his face as if the decision had been made for him, as if clarity had been given where there was none before. And he placed the cash into a small envelope, writing table 7 on the front with a quick stroke of his pen, setting it aside in a drawer that clicked softly when it closed. And outside, under the dim awning, the man watched all of it, every movement, every word, the reflection of the diner lights flickering across the rain between him and the glass. And something in his expression shifted again, not curiosity this time, not even evaluation, but something closer to certainty. Because the pattern was no longer forming, it was complete. And inside, Kelly shook her head, muttering something under her breath as she walked away, already moving on, already dismissing the moment as a missed opportunity. But Ava had already returned to her work, refilling cups, clearing plates, her rhythm unbroken, her focus unchanged, as if nothing unusual had happened at all, as if integrity did not require acknowledgement to exist. And minutes passed. Quiet, steady, the kind of minutes that felt ordinary to everyone except the one person who knew. They were not. And then the door opened again, the sound of rain rushing in before it softened once more, and the man stepped back inside, his jacket still damp, his presence carrying a different weight now. Not louder, not more obvious, but undeniable, and he walked straight to the counter this time, not to his table, his eyes meeting the manager first, then Ava. And without hesitation, he asked in a voice that carried just enough to reach them both, "Did anyone find something I left behind?" And the answer came quickly, without confusion, without delay, because the choice had already been made long before the question was asked. And in that simple exchange, something invisible settled into place. Something that could not be reversed, because the test had never been about the money. It had always been about what people believed when no one told them what to believe. The manager did not hesitate, his hand already moving toward the drawer as if the answer had been waiting there long before the question was asked. And he pulled out the small envelope, the one marked table 7, placing it carefully on the counter between them, his voice steady, respectful, saying, "We kept it for you, sir." And the man looked down at it for a moment, not reaching for it immediately, not reacting with surprise or relief, just acknowledging its presence the way he had acknowledged everything else that night, with quiet attention. And then he nodded once, a small gesture, controlled, before his eyes shifted past the manager and settled on Ava, who stood a few feet away, her posture unchanged, her hands resting lightly at her sides, as if this moment was no different from any other, as if she had simply done what needed to be done and moved on. And that was exactly what made it different, because most people would have watched now, waited for recognition, for reaction, for something that confirmed they had made the right choice. But Ava did not. She had already returned to her work in her mind, already let the moment go, and the man picked up the envelope slowly, feeling its weight again, not the dollars inside but the meaning attached to them. And he opened it just enough to confirm what he already knew, that nothing had been taken, nothing had been altered, nothing had been claimed. And he closed it again, placing it back on the counter instead of into his pocket, and that was when the shift happened, subtle but unmistakable, because this was no longer a question of what had been found, but what would be revealed. And he turned fully now, facing Ava directly, his voice carrying just enough to reach her without disturbing the rest of the room, saying, "You could have kept it." Simple words, but heavier than they sounded. And Ava met his gaze, not defensive, not proud, just honest, replying it was not mine to keep. And there was no hesitation in her answer, no need to think, because the decision had already been made long before the question was spoken. And the man studied her for a second longer, as if confirming something final, something that could not be measured in money or explained in words. And then he did something no one in the diner expected. He smiled, not the faint, controlled expression from earlier, but something real, something that softened the lines of his face, something that made him look less like a stranger passing through and more like someone who had just found what he had been looking for. And Kelly noticed it too, her eyes narrowing slightly as she watched from across the room, sensing that something was shifting beyond her understanding, beyond her control, and the manager glanced between them, unsure of what he was witnessing but aware that it mattered, and the man reached into his jacket once more, not for cash this time, but for something smaller, a card, simple, clean, the kind that did not need to be flashy to carry. Wait, and he held it between his fingers for a moment before placing it on the counter, sliding it gently toward Ava, and the motion was quiet, almost unremarkable, but everything about it said that this night, this place, this series of small choices had been leading here all along, because some tests did not end with answers, they ended with recognition, and in that quiet diner, under the fading sound of rain against the glass, the difference between passing and failing had just become impossible to ignore. The card slid across the counter and came to rest just inches from Ava's hand, simple, matte, unassuming, yet somehow heavier than anything else that had been placed on that surface all night, and for a moment she did not reach for it, not out of hesitation, but because she understood that whatever this was, it was not part of the routine she knew, not part of the quiet rhythm she had mastered, and the diner seemed to notice too, not in words, not in movement, but in the subtle way conversations softened, in the way attention shifted without anyone admitting it, and the man kept his gaze on her, steady, patient, not urging, not explaining, as if the meaning of that small rectangle did not need to be announced, only recognized, and Ava finally looked down, her eyes tracing the clean edges, the minimal print, a name, a company, nothing excessive, nothing loud, but enough, more than enough, and something in her expression changed, not dramatically, not outwardly, just a quiet realization settling beneath the surface, like a puzzle piece finding its place without needing to be forced, and she lifted the card gently, her fingers careful, not because it was fragile, but because moments like this required a different kind of handling, a different kind of awareness, and she read it once, then again, as if confirming what her eyes were telling her, and when she looked back up, the man was no longer just a customer passing through, no longer just a stranger in a worn jacket, but someone whose presence carried a different weight entirely, and still, she did not react the way most people would. There was no sudden excitement, no rush of questions, no visible shift in her posture, only a steady breath and a simple, grounded response, her voice calm as she said, "I did not know." And the man gave a slight nod, as if that was exactly the point, as if the entire night had been built on that one truth, that what people did when they did not know mattered more than anything they could do when they did. And behind them, Kelly leaned in closer, her curiosity no longer hidden, her eyes fixed on the card, on the exchange, trying to piece together what she had missed, what had been happening in plain sight without her seeing it. And the manager stepped forward slightly, his tone cautious now, asking if everything was all right, and the man turned his attention briefly, offering a polite reassurance before returning his focus to Ava, because this was not about explanations, not yet, it was about acknowledgement, and he spoke again, his voice quieter, more direct, saying, "I came here tonight to see something real, not polished, not rehearsed, just real," and his words settled into the space between them, not heavy, not dramatic, just honest, and Ava listened, not interrupting, not reacting beyond what was necessary, because she understood something deeper than what was being said, that this was not about being chosen, not in the way people imagined, but about being seen for what she already was. And the rain outside had almost stopped now, reduced to a soft, occasional tap against the glass, as if the storm itself had reached its conclusion, and inside, the diner returned to its quiet rhythm, plates moving, coffee pouring, life continuing. But something had changed, something subtle yet permanent, because the test was no longer unfolding, it had already been completed, and what remained was not a question of outcome, but of what came after truth had been revealed. And in that moment, standing between the ordinary and the unexpected, Ava held more than a card in her hand. She held the quiet proof that integrity, when it is real, does not need to announce itself. It simply waits to be recognized. The card remained in Ava's hand, but her grip loosened just enough to remind herself that it was still just paper, still just a name, still just a possibility, and not a promise she had asked for, not a reward she had chased. And the man watched her carefully, not for excitement, not for gratitude, but for something far more rare, restraint, because what people did with opportunity revealed as much as what they did without it. And Ava placed the card gently into the pocket of her apron, not displayed, not held up, just stored like any other object that belonged to the moment and not to her identity. And that decision, quiet and almost invisible, landed heavier than any reaction could have. And the man exhaled slowly, a breath that carried closure more than relief, because the search was over, not because he had found perfection, but because he had found truth. And he reached for the envelope again, pushing it back across the counter toward the manager, saying, "Keep it on the bill," evenly, without emphasis, and the manager blinked, unsure at first, before nodding quickly, understanding what was being offered, while Kelly watched from the side. Her expression caught somewhere between disbelief and regret, as if she was replaying every moment in her head, every decision she had dismissed, every instinct she had ignored, and realizing, too, late, that the night had not been ordinary at all. And Ava stepped back once more, returning to her station, picking up a coffee pot, refilling a cup at table 3 as if nothing had shifted, as if the night had not just rewritten something unseen. And the man turned toward the door again, his steps unhurried, his presence no longer searching but settled. And just before he reached the exit, he paused, not dramatically, not to make a statement, but just long enough to glance back one final time, his eyes finding Ava across the room. And there was no nod, no gesture, no signal, just a quiet acknowledgement that did not need to be understood to be real. And then he stepped outside, the door closing softly behind him as the last traces of rain faded into a distant echo. And inside, the diner returned fully to itself, to the hum of conversations, the clink of plates, the steady rhythm of ordinary life continuing as it always did. But something had changed, something that would not show on receipts or tips or schedules, something that lived only in the space between actions and meaning. And Ava moved through her shift the same way she always had, steady, present, unshaken, because she had never been waiting for a moment like this. She had simply been living in a way that made moments like this inevitable. And the card remained in her pocket, unnoticed by most, unspoken by her. A quiet bridge between two worlds that had crossed for a reason neither of them needed to fully explain. And somewhere beyond the diner, beyond the fading storm, the man walked away with something money could not measure, not satisfaction, not control, but certainty. Because in a world where loyalty could be bought and performance could be rehearsed, he had found the one thing that could not be faked, and it had not asked to be seen. It had simply been there all along, waiting in the smallest choices, in the quietest moments, in the kind of character that does not rise when tested, but reveals itself exactly as it has always been.